Former Toronto Maple Leaf general manager Kyle Dubas is reportedly being investigated for a conflict of interest. We'll discuss how this came about, what is a conflict of interest, could it impact his future employment with other teams, will there be a punishment? We'll discuss all the potential scenarios coming up next. So welcome back to another video here, Top Shelf Hockey. We have some interesting breaking news, you could say. This report comes from dailyfaceoff.com. And NHL insider Frank Saravalli, who has confirmed by communication with an NHLPA representative that former Toronto Maple Leaf general manager is in fact being reviewed and investigated for a potential conflict of interest. I will show you some snippets of the article just to kind of give you some context here, what we're discussing. Of course, this article will be linked in the pinned comment down below if you want to read through the entire full details here from dailyfaceoff.com. But essentially, the gist of it is that the NHLPA, it says here, there's reviewing the relationship between former Toronto Maple Leaf general manager Kyle Dubas and his agent with Wasserman Agency for a potential conflict of interest. Now, of course, Wasserman is one of the bigger firms that represents a lot of NHL players. They do represent approximately 10% of NHL PA members, including some big names like Toronto Maple Leafs star centerman Austin Matthews, Oilers star centerman and arguably the greatest player in the league, Connor McDavid, as well as some top defensemen like Roman Josi and Zach Werenski. So 10% might seem like a small piece of the pie, but some of the players that they have are some of the biggest contracts in the league. So certainly they do handle some pretty sizable contracts here for NHL players. Now, in case you're not aware as well, Kyle Dubas himself, before he was ever into management, at one point was a certified NHLPA player representative. He's worked on the agent side of the business in the past, so he certainly knows the ins and outs of what's allowed and what's not allowed. At least he should. So this really, it shouldn't come as a huge shock or surprise. Now, essentially, here's the gist of it. Dubas was being represented by Chris Armstrong. Now, Chris Armstrong works for the Wasserman Agency. He does not work directly on the hockey side of the business. Now, he normally represents golf clients. That's what his main job is. However, there's a lot of instances in business where, a different member of a different division or something is brought in. They kind of try to eliminate any potential conflicts or not. And, I guess we'll see. But essentially, the rules are, in case you're not aware, NHLPA certified agent regulations prohibit agents from repping and providing services to any officer or employee of an NHL club. So obviously you can't be an agent for players and for GMs. It's just or any other executives for that matter. I mean, it's kind of a conflict to negotiate contracts for the player and of course then their player's boss. That's just not how things work. A lot of relationships can get tied up in that and, certainly can be potential issues. Now, of course, you might ask yourself, well, why is this such a big deal? Clearly, Armstrong doesn't work with any other hockey players, at least not that we're aware of. I know if you look back at his history, there was an article that said he joined the firm, I think it was 2010, and he was instrumental to the development of the agency, and then he was involved more with hockey at that point. So it's fair to say he definitely knows and has lots of connections in the hockey world, even though it appears as though, from what we can tell, it looks like right now, he's not an actual certified NHLPA agent, and he's not actively representing any current active NHL hockey players. I'm not sure if he has in the past or not. I couldn't dig up that kind of information. But essentially, the big question here that the NHLPA is trying to determine is if this agent working for the same agency that represents hockey players and would obviously represent players that Kyle Dubas has negotiated on behalf of, obviously for the team he was working for, is that considered a conflict of interest? So would that agent be also prohibited from representing any executives from NHL clubs? That's the big question here that the NHLPA is trying to determine. Now, when reached for comment, anonymously, of course, Frank Saravalli reached out to competing agencies and asked their opinion if this is something that should be allowed, and multiple agents said absolutely not. They felt it was a pretty black and white, cut and dry type of scenario, that it's certainly something that is and should be considered prohibited. So therefore, I guess what's going to happen? I'm not sure. See, that's the tricky part. Is there any sort of punishment or consequences that could possibly come from this. Technically, even though Armstrong has been representing Dubas in negotiations, he technically has not signed a contract that we're aware of as of yet. We do know that he went through a negotiation process with the Toronto Maple Leafs on an extension, and obviously that fell through, did not happen. We've discussed the scenario multiple times on what happened between Dubas and the Leafs. Some make it out to believe that it's all about the contract terms, that Shanahan just wouldn't do it. Some say Shanahan was convinced that the hesitation from Dubas to commit and give him the time, the fact that he took so much time to decide if he wanted to still be GM, gave him reason to believe he wasn't all in and was hesitant. There's some that say that there was board interference as well, because of course MLSE is comprised of a board of directors, so obviously their own 37.5% from the Rogers Telecom, equal shares to the Bell Telecom, and of course Larry Tannenbaum is the owner of the difference. So you have three different, really large entities that own the Toronto Maple Leafs together. They all have members on the board. Certainly there's been reports that say that some of the board members that work on the Rogers side of the business really wanted Dubas out. Now, I guess we'll probably never know the complete and honest 100% truth here, and some may say it does or doesn't matter. I don't know. I've seen some people say that obviously once Brad Treliving became available, and the fact that the Leafs have not had the playoff success that they were hoping and looking for over the last number of years, that obviously Treliving, I'm not sure anybody's aware of this as well, but his father, Jim Treliving, is a very well-known, very wealthy Canadian entrepreneur. Obviously, he owns, I believe he's the co-founder and owns the Boston Pizza restaurant chain. Obviously, and some say that he has a lot of friends and that there might be collusion there from the Rogers side to obviously, somebody they're friends with to hire his son. I'm hard to say. I can't see that really so being the case because that to me is a whole other different can of worms of conflict of interest. But at the end of the day here, what's going to happen if they determine that this is a conflict of interest? Will they just say, no, you can't represent Kyle Dubas? And is that all that happens? Is there going to be some sort of punishment to Dubas? We know that he's in the process of meeting with the Pittsburgh Penguins about their open GM vacancy, and whether or not he's going to accept that job or not, we don't know. Based on reports, we're led to believe that it's basically his job. If he wants it, they put a complete stop to their GM process, even though they were reportedly very close to making a decision and naming a new GM amongst the candidates that were still involved in the process, which include former assistant GM in Pittsburgh, Jason Botterill, and that Dubas, when he became available after the news broke last Friday, that all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, hold on, pump the brakes here, let's stop the process and see if Kyle will speak to us. They requested permission from the Leafs. It was granted. We do know that Kyle Dubas traveled to Pittsburgh to meet with the team. There was reports he met with their ownership, and he also met apparently with Sidney Crosby. I believe it was like at a practice facility or something. So at the end of the day, we know they might be going through negotiations. We don't know. We know that a lot of the things that sounded like Dubas wanted in Toronto through these negotiations that we're talking about were not things the Leafs would give it. He wanted more, a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more power, more say. And, it's a similar structure in Pittsburgh with Mike Sullivan having a big voice on personnel decisions. We've recently heard about the dysfunction that was going on in Pittsburgh before between Sullivan and Ron Hextall and Brian Burke. And obviously ownership there's, Fenway Sports Group, pretty powerful group as well, who's certainly, involved. So I don't know he's going to get what he wanted in Toronto down in Pittsburgh anyway. It's really hard to say. And there's a lot of arguments on where Kyle Dubas should go and what he should do. And I guess we'll have to wait and see what he decides. But some say, well, you know what, is this really an investigation because it's more of a connected to Toronto thing? Why is it getting so much attention? This seems like not really a big deal. And it's really difficult to say. This is not something I've personally ever seen at all before in hockey news circles at all. Is this a case of the Maple Leafs, suggesting to the NHLPA that they need to look into this after how things went? I don't know that. I'm not saying that they did that. I'm just saying that it makes you wonder. I mean, at the same time, we had heard reports recently that, how does this affect the relationship between the Maple Leafs and Austin Matthews? Austin Matthews is rep by the same agency that Kyle Dubas has right currently for representation now. So we know that Dubas was close with the top Leaf players. We know that he negotiated all their recent contracts, some that are coming close to being expired and that they need extensions. The future of guys like Matthews and Nylander certainly, to some degree questionable for sure going forward. Whoever's the next GM is going to have to decide, do they extend them? Do they trade them? What are the futures? What's this team need to look like? What changes need to be made? It's going to be a big part of the job for whoever runs that. And I know, there's lots of talk before that if Dubas leaves Toronto, it could have a big impact on Matthews' decision. And we're going to have to wait and see on that. I mean, I'd have to think that it's not going to be the end-all, be-all on his decision. I think the biggest thing for Matthews should be whether or not he wants to stay in Toronto and feels like they're in a spot where they can win. That, to me, would be the bigger thing to take into consideration. But we've also seen several player agents go from the agent side to management in the NHL. Look at Ken Hughes, the GM of the Montreal Canadiens, was a former NHL agent. You had like Emily Castonguay, who was a player agent representing players like Alexis Lafreniere, now works in the Canucks for now. But that's just a couple of examples. There are plenty more. I mean, you can say that when you go from the agent side to the executive side on the team side of things, you have lots of relationships, and, you can't really say it's a conflict. You left one job to go to another. I don't know, this guy working for Wasserman that's representing Kyle Dubas, is it really a conflict? Is it really that big of a deal? He's not representing any other hockey players. Where does this really come from? Is there any potential punishment? None of that at this point is known. All we really know for sure is it's been confirmed by the PA that there is a review and investigation going on, and we'll have to wait and see what comes from it. Will it impact, like I said, future employment here for Dubas? We don't know. It's just the very early stages of all this breaking. So let me know your thoughts on this scenario. Is this something that the PA and whoever decided to look into this, is it blowing out of proportion? Is it a big deal? Do you see a conflict of interest? Let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.